Nothing is more confusing than the silence of someone who used to pay attention to you. Suddenly, the person stops responding, changes their gaze, leaves your words hanging, and you're left trying to figure out where you went wrong. It's in this void that suffering begins, because silence, when used deliberately, becomes a weapon. And someone who is silent is not always neutral. Sometimes they're in control. This kind of silence is not peace, it's tension, it's punishment. It's a way to make you question yourself, blame yourself, diminish yourself. And those who mastered this strategy know exactly what they're doing. Villains use silence like someone sharpening a blade to cut without leaving marks. Today, you're going to understand how silence can be a tool of psychological power, and how to recognize when it's being used to manipulate you. But more than that, you'll discover what that silence reveals about you. Because sometimes, what hurts us the most isn't the silence of the other, but what it awakens within ourselves. Stay until the end. This may be the most important conversation you've ever had with someone who never said a word. Silence has a sound of its own. It's not absence, it's presence. A dense presence, one that fills the space between two people as if carrying 1,000 unspoken words. In many moments, what disturbs us is not what we hear, but what we imagine the other person thinks and doesn't say. Silence leaves room for doubt, and where there is doubt, there is vulnerability. Human beings seek answers, even harsh ones. But in the face of silence, the mind starts to fill the gaps with assumptions, and almost always with the worst ones. Imagine a tense conversation where someone goes silent just when you most need clarity. You ask something important, but all you get is silence. That's not just frustrating, it's wounding. Because not knowing what the other person feels, thinks, or wants triggers the fear of abandonment, rejection, contempt, and more than that, it forces you to face your own internal discomfort. Villains understand this. They know that sometimes it's more effective to be silent than to scream. They know that silence creates tension, imposes power, places the other in a position of fragility. And even outside of fiction, this strategy is used in relationships, families, workplaces. Silence becomes a language of domination. It's in this unfilled space that the psychological game unfolds. And if you don't learn to recognize this invisible tension, you could spend your life reacting to what was never said and being manipulated by it. A villain doesn't need to raise their voice to control. They can simply go quiet. They can look someone in the eye, keep a blank face, and wait. Because silence, when used with intention, creates discomfort, disorients, breaks the logic of the conversation. It's a pause that offers no relief, only anguish. And that's exactly where the power lies. Silence is a strategy. In interrogations, it's used to induce confessions. In negotiations, to create pressure. In abusive relationships, to punish. And in movies, it's the moment the villain goes silent and everyone holds their breath, waiting for the explosion that never comes. Silence becomes a riddle, and whoever masters the riddle masters the scene. But this power isn't limited to fiction. How many times has someone used silence against you, not responding to a message, ignoring an attempt at dialogue, using silence as a shield, as punishment, as a warning? Silence can be a knife with no visible edge, but a deep effect. It humiliates without words, subdues without commands. And the more you try to break that silence, the more it feels like you're shrinking in front of the other person. This kind of villain doesn't scream, they go silent. And in that silence, they force the other to get lost in assumptions, to feel small, guilty, anxious. Silence is not passivity, it's active domination. And recognizing that is the first step to no longer bowing before it. Nietzsche wrote that when you gaze long into the abyss gazes back into you, and silence, in many moments, is that abyss. When someone goes quiet in front of you, the sound that begins to emerge is not theirs, it's your own. It's in this silent space that you begin to hear what you've been avoiding: thoughts, insecurities, uncomfortable truths. The silence of the other has this almost cruel power. It forces you to listen to yourself. And we're not always prepared for that, because the noise of words fills, distracts, soothes. But silence, when it appears, exposes what's inside. You ask something serious and receive silence in return. At that moment, the dialogue breaks, but another conversation begins inside your mind. Did I go too far? Did I do something wrong? Does he despise me? These are projections. And Nietzsche knew that we project what we are, what we fear, what we repress. This silence is a kind of existential provocation. It forces you to face your own expectations, your needs, your craving for control. And that's where the psychological game intensifies. Because instead of looking at the other, you start battling your own internal voices. Villains, masters of manipulation, know how to provoke this forced plunge into the abyss. They know that silence, besides intimidating, can make the other person fall apart from the inside alone. By offering no verbal resistance, they force the victim to wrestle with themselves. But there is something to be learned here. If you have the courage to stay in that abyss without running away, you may discover not only what the other is trying to provoke, but what within you needs to be faced. That's where true strength is born. Not all manipulation comes with explicit lies. Sometimes it shows up in what's not said, in the silence that confuses, in the lack of response that undermines one's grasp on reality. This is the territory of silent gaslighting, a subtle yet powerful way of distorting what the other feels, thinks, and perceives without ever saying a word. Think of a relationship where one person, when confronted, simply goes quiet. There's no denial, no explanation, just silence. The other insists, seeks answers, tries to talk, but the lack of reaction turns the confrontation into desperation. The victim starts to doubt themselves. Am I overreacting? Did I misunderstand? Am I crazy for feeling this way? This kind of silence causes deep emotional confusion. It disrupts the natural flow of validation we need in human relationships. By denying any response, the manipulator offers no rebuttal, but also confirms nothing. They leave the other suspended, isolated, lost between what they felt and what they're not sure they're allowed to feel. It's a cruel form of control, because silence, in this case, is not neutrality, it's intentional omission. It's a psychological game where the other always loses, because they never know where they stand. And the more they try to understand, the more emotionally drained they become. This technique is used by sophisticated villains, but also by ordinary people who've learned, consciously or unconsciously, to control others through absence. It's a form of power that disarms, that offers nothing to fight against. The only way out is to recognize the game, to stop seeking validation where there's only silence, to understand that the absence of a response is also a response, and that, in the face of it, the healthiest thing may be to walk away before you start doubting your own sanity. Carl Jung believed that there are forces within us that operate below the surface of consciousness, and often it is in silence that these forces manifest. It's not necessary to speak for emotional content to surface. A pause, a lack of response, a glance that doesn't meet yours is enough. It is in this vacuum that dormant internal tensions arise. And in this context, silence becomes a portal. It doesn't reveal the other, it reveals you. When someone goes silent in front of you, something stirs inside. It might be sudden anxiety, a painful memory, a fear you thought was overcome. This happens because silence removes the external noise, and with it, the distractions. It is in this moment that we listen, not with our ears, but with our bodies. The tightness in the chest, the lump in the throat, the nameless discomfort. Jung would call this contact with unconscious content. You don't need technical terms to feel it. You simply notice that something in you reacts intensely to something that wasn't said. Why does it bother you so much? The other person's silence touches parts of you that you don't fully understand yet. Perhaps something from childhood, an old fear of abandonment, the pain of not feeling seen. Silence, then, becomes more than absence. It becomes a mirror. Villains who master the psychological realm know this. They don't need to say what they want to provoke. They simply let the silence do the work. And the victim's mind takes care of filling the voids with their own pain. But silence can also be a key. If you learn to listen to it attentively, you may begin to perceive what inside you still needs to be welcomed. Not for the other, but for yourself. What silence triggers can be the beginning of a new awareness. Not all violence comes with shouting. Sometimes it arrives with silence. A cold, calculated silence that is not peace, it's punishment. This is the silent treatment, a common form of emotional control used in toxic relationships. And the cruelest part, often the victim doesn't even realize they're being punished. They just feel like they've done something wrong, that they need to make amends, that they've lost the right to exist in the other's presence. This kind of silence is not a gesture of introspection, but a mechanism of domination. It's when someone chooses to stay silent, not to reflect, but to hurt. Not responding, not looking, pretending the other person isn't there. This creates a type of pain that leaves no visible mark, but bleeds on the inside. Because emotional exclusion is one of the deepest forms of rejection. In abusive contexts, silence becomes a weapon to control the other person's behavior. The victim starts walking on eggshells, trying to avoid more silences. They become anxious, submissive, dependent. And all of this in the name of something that was never even said. Silence, here is a message. You're not worth enough for me to waste my voice on you. And the most dangerous part, this dynamic can become normalized. The victim learns to accept silence as part of the relationship, as if love came with forced emotional pauses, as if ignoring were just a way of being. But it's not. Recognizing this pattern is crucial, because no one deserves to live in a space where silence is used as punishment, where silence doesn't free but imprisons, and where the fear of being ignored outweighs the right to be heard. Silence isn't always the enemy. It only becomes dangerous when it's imposed as a weapon, not when it's chosen as a space for awareness. The real turning point comes when you stop begging for answers and start listening to what's happening inside you. Because the psychological game feeds on your reaction. When you try to break the other person's silence at any cost, you're unknowingly handing over your power. Breaking this cycle takes courage. It means understanding that not every silence needs to be filled. That sometimes the strongest person is not the one who shouts, but the one who stays calm even in the face of absence. And it starts with a simple question. Why does the other person's silence affect me so much? That question is a key. It shifts the focus from external control to internal clarity. Turning silence into listening means using the moment of absence as an opportunity to notice your own patterns. Do you feel anger, abandonment, fear of loss? Name it, feel it. Write it down, and more than that, don't react automatically. Wait, reflect. The pause can be your ally if used with intention. In relationships, this changes everything. Instead of chasing, you breathe. Instead of pushing for a response, you offer presence. And it's in that space of non-reactivity that manipulation loses its power, because the psychological game needs two players. When one leaves the board, the other loses control. Simple exercises can help. Practicing daily moments of silence. Writing what you feel without judgment. Observing how you react to being ignored. Over time, you realize that silence can stop being punishment and become protection. Listening isn't staying silent. It's choosing what deserves to be heard. After so many silences that hurt, it's time to talk about the silence that heals. Because not all silence is manipulation, punishment, or a power strategy. There is another kind, rare but transformative. It's the silence you choose. The one that doesn't come from outside, but from within. The one that doesn't shut down, but reveals. This silence doesn't impose fear. It invites listening. It's not a lack of communication, but a deep presence. When you stop desperately seeking answers outside, you begin to hear something more important, your own awareness. And it's in that internal space that the greatest insights arise. Because when everything goes quiet, what remains is the essential. In Eastern philosophy, silence is seen as wisdom. In meditation, it's a practice. In solitude, it's a reunion. And in psychology, it's the necessary space for the mind to reorganize. Jung said that the encounter with the deepest self only happens in retreat, far from the noise of the world. Many of the answers you seek in others are hidden in layers that only emerge in silence. That's why, instead of reacting to someone else's silence, create your own. Not as an escape, but as a practice. Set aside minutes of your day to simply be with yourself. No distractions, no need to explain, just being. You'll notice that in this kind of silence, there is no judgment, there is clarity, there is strength. There is a reconnection with something that doesn't depend on external approval. It's where you begin to reclaim your own power. Silence may have been used against you, but it can also become your most faithful ally. Because when you learn to inhabit it, no one else can use it to control you. Do you remember what we said at the beginning? That silence can weigh more than any word. Well, now you might understand why. It's not just the absence of sound. It's the presence of meaning, of tension, of everything we avoid saying, and which, precisely because of that, screams inside. Throughout this video, you've seen that silence can be a weapon, a punishment, an abyss, but it can also be a mirror. And what it reflects depends on how willing you are to face yourself. Think of silence as a mirror in a dark room. It shows nothing until you have the courage to turn on the light. When the villain goes quiet, they're offering a challenge. Look at yourself without distractions. And that might be the greatest psychological and philosophical provocation someone can make. Because the true battle isn't with the other, it's with what the silence awakens inside you. If you enjoyed this content and want to understand more about life's questions, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who's also one of the awakened.